So there's no point going into samadhi, there's no point in going into absorption in being if you still believe that all of creation actually is real. You know, there's no point in going into meditation with an escapist mentality, because you're trying to escape from something, and if you're trying to escape from something, then what you're assuming is that what you're escaping from is real. So the more you meditate in order to get away from something, the more you're actually developing the reality of that thing that you're getting away from. Even if it were possible, the moment one returns from such contemplation, the creation with its sorrow arises in the mind. Movement of thought creates the notion of created objects. Movement of thought creates the notion of created objects. Again, I like to think in terms of attention here. It's the attention which gets absorbed in objects and thereby validates the idea of the reality of these objects. The attention goes to these objects because it believes they're real and are somehow satisfying and attractive. I think that's what we can mean by movement of thought. So stilling the mind is really about taking control of the attention. Even as the essence exists in all things, as oil exists in sesame seeds, as aroma exists in flowers, the faculty of objective perception exists in the perceiver. Even as the dream objects are experienced only by the dreamer, the objects of perception are experienced by the perceiver. Just as from a seed the sprout arises in due time, this potentiality becomes manifest as the notion of creation. So all that's being said is that this notion of creation is actually inherent in pure being. It's not a mistake, it's part of a working out of something. It's basically just how things are. Before proceeding on to chapter 2, I feel I ought to say a little bit more about chapter 1. And before I say anything more about chapter 1, I think it's good to take stock of just exactly what we're about here. This section is the beginning. This is the beginning of the section on dealing with creation. Now, as was mentioned earlier, there are 5 sections to the Yoga Vasistha. The last one is to do with liberation. I think that's the longest section. And the section just before that is to do with dissolution. And this section is creation. And if you've been with me all the way through these videos, then looking back to the beginning of the second section, we had the story of Sukha, whose concern, he was in a similar position to Rama. He was quite despondent, and it's like the key to wisdom hadn't yet been turned on him. He needed to realise experientially what he already understood intellectually. And what he realised was that well, his question was, how did this diversity of world creation come into being, and how will it come to an end? This isn't just, asking about the nature of cosmology of the universe as we usually understand it. He's actually wondering, he actually wants to bring it to an end. He wants to bring creation to an end. And it's by bringing creation to an end that we have the end of suffering. And for it to come to an end, it helps to understand how it's being brought into being. And the answer that resonates with them is this diversity arises on account of mental modifications, and it will cease when these mental modifications cease. So there's a kind of flipping here between, isn't there, between understanding the universe in its usual physical, cosmological sense and understanding it as something that is created by us, basically. Not by us as egos or as personalities, but as something intrinsic to us, in the same way that the dream world is created by the dreamer. So the concern here is with the cessation of creation. Basically, it's like, how do we wake up from the dream, to put it in more understandable terms, perhaps. And so towards the end of the previous chapter, Rama is told, if the creation is in fact real, then there's no possibility of its cessation. For it is an immutable law that the unreal has no real existence and the real does not cease to be. Yeah, so if something is real, it's not going to come to an end. And something can only come to an end if it wasn't real in the first place. It takes a little bit of... It makes sense, but I don't know if there's a way I can think of explaining that anymore. But the main point here is that we actually do want to bring the universe to an end. Now, I mentioned earlier that this way of thinking, or this way of expressing things, caused some problems to Westerners in the 60s. That somehow the universe is going to... You reach a certain state of meditation and somehow the universe is going to disappear. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe there are states of intense meditation whereby you enter into a different state altogether and the physical universe no longer... You've gone beyond it, perhaps. Who knows? Who knows? But it seems to me that that's not what the Yoga Vasistha is talking about, because the Yoga Vasistha isn't teaching meditation. It's not teaching us to leave the world behind in that sense, because the very first passages were about how that you continue doing your work in the world. It's all about our relationship with that world, and that relationship needs to be completely broken, and a new liberated way of relating to the world comes into place. So in that sense, we have the world needs to, in order for that relationship to break down, it needs to be dissolved. This is what the dissolution is.